The cease and desist letter was clean, cold, and legally airtight. It cited the footage of her taking and retaining my mail, the messages demanding payment, and the threats of legal action unsupported by any legitimate claim. It warned of criminal charges if she continued. Elaine read it. Then she unraveled. I didn't witness it firsthand, but I watched the aftermath unfold in a series of increasingly frantic messages sent not to me, but to members of our family. She tried to get them on her side. She spun a version of the story where I was being ungrateful, selfish, and easily manipulated by an aggressive attorney. But the evidence contradicted her. When my cousin Rachel reached out, asking gently for my side, I didn't argue. I simply sent her the documentation packet, organized, time-stamped, irrefutable. Rachel responded with one sentence. I had no idea. Word spread quietly. Elaine began to lose her audience. She deleted her posts, but screenshots had already traveled faster than erasure. People who once praised her began questioning her motives. Her carefully curated persona, selfless, supportive, saint-like, started to crack under the pressure of actual truth. And then came the breaking point. Cynthia filed a formal demand for the return of my property with our local precinct. A procedural step, not a public one, but enough to generate a case number. A polite officer called Elaine to inform her of the complaint. That call changed everything. She returned my stolen mail in a brown grocery bag, left on my porch with no note. It smelled faintly of her perfume, lavender and something sugary. For a moment, I stared at it, remembering childhood sleepovers, shared secrets, braiding each other's hair. Then I brought the bag inside and placed it quietly on the table. Her downfall was not dramatic. It was silent, a slow collapsing of the illusion she had constructed around herself. People stopped asking her for advice. Family members grew cautious of her dramatics. And most importantly, she realized she was alone in a battle she had invented. She sent one final message. I hope you're happy. You destroyed our relationship. I read it twice. Then I typed a single sentence. I didn't destroy anything. I simply stopped pretending. I blocked her number. Not out of spite, but out of peace. Her consequences were entirely of her own making. I had not shouted. I had not retaliated. I had not sought vengeance. I simply allowed truth, boundaries, and documentation to do the work. And quietly, efficiently they did. The letter was written in shaky penmanship, on stationery I recognized from her desk drawer. A floral design with gold trim, a gift I had given her years ago. The sight of it softened me just a little. Inside, her words were surprisingly subdued. She didn't apologize. Not exactly. Elaine had never been fluent in humility. But she did write that she had reflected on recent events and recognized that emotions may have clouded her judgment. She mentioned feeling unseen during my marriage and, finally important, while helping me through the divorce. The settlement, she said, felt like proof that the universe acknowledged her contributions. It was the closest she had ever come to admitting insecurity. And for the first time in months, I felt a pang of something other than disappointment. I felt grief. Not for the drama, not for the attempted theft, but for the sister I had always wanted her to be. The sister she perhaps wanted to be too, but didn't know how. I sat with the letter for a long time. I didn't cry. At 62, tears come less easily. Emotions settled deeper now, like stones in a riverbed. Eventually, I wrote a response, measured, compassionate, but firm. I thanked her for her letter. I acknowledged that she had been there for me during an impossible time. But I also stated clearly that support is not a transaction. Love is not a ledger. And boundaries are not punishments. I told her I wished her well. Truly. But I needed space, healing, and a life free from her expectations of ownership. I did not invite further conversation. I mailed it the next morning. Over the following weeks, I felt the weight lifting. My house grew quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet, not the anxious hush that filled it during the divorce. I began tending my garden again, pruning roses, watering basil, kneeling in the soil like it was my second home. I took morning walks. I rediscovered the soft joy of cooking for one. I learned to sleep without fear of late-night footsteps outside my door. The settlement money went into a carefully managed account. I didn't splurge. I didn't celebrate. I simply exhaled. Healing, I've learned, is not something that arrives. It grows. Quietly. Steadily. Like roots. And in that silence, I realized something extraordinary. Strength is not what you wield against others. Strength is what you reclaim for yourself. The family gathering was small, my niece's birthday, a backyard barbecue with mismatched chairs and citronella candles. Children ran across the lawn. Someone was grilling. For the first time in a long while, life felt normal. Elaine stood near the patio door, holding a paper plate she clearly had no interest in eating from. When she saw me, she hesitated. Then she approached. Her steps were slow, careful, almost fragile. "Marianne," she said softly. I nodded. "Hello, Elaine." There was no tension, surprisingly. No sharpness. Only a quiet understanding of the distance now between us. She swallowed. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry." The words were small, barely formed, but they were real. They didn't erase her actions. They didn't rebuild what she had fractured. But they acknowledged the truth. And that was enough. "I appreciate that," I said gently. "And I hope you're doing better." She nodded, relieved. Not forgiven, relieved. There's a difference. We talked briefly about the weather, the food, the children playing tag in the yard. It was polite, muted, civil, a new chapter, but not a restored one. As I left the gathering later that afternoon, I felt a sense of closure settling over me like a soft shawl. Not because justice had been delivered with fury, but because justice had unfolded calmly, quietly, guided by truth and boundaries instead of vengeance. People think revenge requires destruction. It doesn't. In my case, revenge was simple. I stopped allowing myself to be used. I stopped apologizing for my own existence. I stopped letting guilt masquerade as love. And I let a manipulative pattern collapse under the weight of documentation, honesty, and restraint. My sister once told me to stay strong. She had no idea what strength actually looked like. Strength is measured in silence, in choices, in boundaries drawn with steady hands. It is the courage to confront betrayal not with matching cruelty, but with unwavering clarity. So if you ever find yourself in a situation where someone believes they are entitled to your life, your earnings, your healing, or your suffering, remember this. Strength is not granted. It is reclaimed. And sometimes the greatest redemption is simply walking away from the battlefield and realizing the war ended the moment you stopped participating. That is my story, and I am stronger now than I have ever been. Cynthia never used the word revenge. She preferred phrases like corrective action and boundary enforcement. Her voice alone steadied me. We met the next morning. I brought everything: printed texts, the itemized invoice, the timeline of her visits, the email where she assigned an $80,000 value to emotional labor. Every detail. Every insult disguised as generosity. Every threat. Cynthia read silently for nearly half an hour. Finally, she looked up. "Your sister believes she's entitled to your marital settlement. Legally, she has no standing. Zero." "I know," I said. "But she thinks. What she thinks doesn't matter. What she does." Cynthia leaned back in her chair. "We're going to gather evidence. Quietly. Methodically. And we're going to let her walk herself into consequences." It wasn't about punishing Elaine. It was about revealing the truth. Over the next week, I documented everything. Every message she sent. Every voicemail. Every unannounced visit. I saved screenshots. I time-stamped photos of missing mail. I had already begun a habit of writing daily summaries during my divorce, so I added new entries. What she said, what she took, what she demanded. Cynthia asked me to request, politely in writing, that Elaine return my documents. "Give her a chance to make the right choice," she said. "When she doesn't, she incriminates herself." And she didn't. Elaine responded with a furious email claiming she had a legal right to review my financials because she contributed meaningfully to the dissolution of my marriage. It was laughable, but Cynthia told me not to react. Let her build the tower. She'll stand on top of it when it collapses. Meanwhile, I took practical steps. I changed the locks. I purchased a home security camera, subtle, motion-activated, facing the walkway. I placed a written request for a mail hold at the post office, so no new envelopes would be delivered while my investigation was ongoing. The camera was installed just in time. 3 nights later, at 11:52 p.m., Elaine approached my door with my missing mail in her hand. She didn't return it. She photographed it, held each envelope up, snapped a picture, then tucked everything back into her purse. Evidence of her theft, documented by the lens she didn't know existed. Cynthia reviewed the footage the next morning and nodded once, satisfied. "This," she said, "is enough." But she wasn't done. She recommended filing a formal request for the return of stolen property, followed by a cease and desist letter meticulously outlining the legal consequences of further interference. You'll send it. Not me, she said. She needs to see your strength. Strength. The same word Elaine had used, but now reclaimed. And with every piece of documentation, I felt myself returning, slowly, to the woman I had always been, the woman I had forgotten. Calm. Precise. Cynthia slid a thin folder across her desk. Inside were printed screenshots, public ones. Elaine's posts. My sister had been broadcasting my entire divorce online for months. Not explicitly naming me, but implying enough that anyone who knew us would recognize the story. She positioned herself as the selfless caretaker supporting her broken sibling. Every post came with comments showering her with praise. You're such a good sister, people wrote. She's lucky to have you. Cynthia tapped the papers gently. This establishes motive. I stared at them, stunned. While I had been confiding in her, she had been narrating my pain like a memoir for strangers. And now she wanted to profit from it. This was the moment that shifted everything. I looked up at Cynthia. What do we do? You decide, she said. Do you want to enforce boundaries? Or do you want to pursue legal remedy? Is there a difference? I asked quietly. Yes. Boundaries end the conflict. Legal remedy exposes it. I sat with her words. I thought about decades of shrinking myself, so Elaine could feel large. I thought of every holiday where she turned the spotlight into her personal lamp. I thought of every time she made my achievements sound like footnotes to her own. And I thought of the night she stole my mail. For the first time in months, I felt something unfamiliar rise in me. Not anger, not grief. Authority. My sister crossed a line, I said. And she believes there won't be consequences. There will be, Cynthia said. I went home that afternoon and drafted a letter, formal, calm, and devastating in its clarity. I listed each incident. The attempted financial claim, the unauthorized entry, the removal of personal documents, the threats. I demanded the immediate return of my property. I informed her that further interference would result in law enforcement involvement. Cynthia refined it. We sent it certified. Elaine received it 2 days later. The phone rang immediately. I didn't pick up. She left 5 voicemails, each more frantic than the last. Outrage, pleading, guilt-tripping, bargaining. I documented all of them. That evening, she showed up at my door again, rattling the locked handle. Marianne, open this door right now, she shouted. You don't threaten family. I stayed silent. The camera rolled. You think you're so strong now, she yelled. Fine. Let's see how strong you are without anyone on your side. I didn't move. I didn't speak. And eventually she left. But not before tossing an envelope onto my porch. Inside was a handwritten note. If you want war, you'll get one. I read it once, then placed it neatly into my documentation folder. War was unnecessary. Truth would accomplish everything. And I was done being a woman she underestimated. She was the older sister by 5 years, the golden child with perfect handwriting and a talent for turning any mundane moment into a small spectacle. When we were young, I idolized her. When we were older, I grew cautious of her. She loved attention the way plants love sunlight. She thrived in it and withered without it. I, on the other hand, preferred the shade. But even in adulthood, family roles have a way of lingering. I remained the quiet, dependable one. The helper. The apologizer. The one who smoothed tensions after family gatherings and remembered everyone's birthdays. And Elaine remained the one who took up space with ease. When my divorce began, she stepped neatly into the role of savior. She offered her guest room before I even asked. She cooked dinners. She sent encouraging messages, so often that I once joked she should write a motivational book. She laughed and said, "Maybe I will when this is all over." But underneath her kindness was a subtle performance, gentle reminders of how much she was sacrificing for me. She would sigh when she drove me to appointments. She would mention how tired she was after our late-night talks. She referred to her guest room as your little refuge, in a tone that implied she was doing something monumental. I didn't question it then. I was too busy grieving. But now, with distance and clarity, I realized Elaine had rewritten our dynamic without my consent. In her mind, she wasn't helping her sister through a crisis. She was investing in a payout. And when my settlement came through, she saw it as the moment her investment matured. The itemized invoice she emailed me 3 days after our conversation only confirmed that. It was absurd. Dinners, $340. Gas for drives, $52. Emotional labor, $80,000. She actually put a numeric value on her sympathy. I stared at the document for a long time, the words blurring. It wasn't about the money. It was about ownership. She believed she owned a part of my suffering, and therefore a part of my reward for surviving it. I didn't call her. I didn't respond. I needed time to untangle the knot she had tied around my heart. I spent that week reflecting on our childhood, our adulthood, our patterns. I realized something painful. For decades, I had been training her to believe that my boundaries were flexible, that my gratitude meant submission, that her needs outranked mine. This was not just about a settlement check. It was about reclaiming my place in my own life. So I made a quiet promise to myself. I would address her intrusion not with anger, but with truth. I would gather proof, record timelines, and document every exchange. Not to harm her, but to protect myself. And eventually, to restore the balance that should have existed between us all along. When she said those words, "I'll take legal action," I felt something inside me finally settle. A strange, steady calm. Fear had no place left to sit. Elaine still had my spare house key from when I stayed with her. I had forgotten to ask for it back. That was my mistake, and one I would correct, but at that moment I simply watched her walk into my kitchen like she owned it. "I'm serious, Marianne," she said, placing her large purse on my counter. "I've talked to friends. You owe me." The word "owe" landed like dust on furniture, insidious, accumulating, hard to ignore. But instead of responding, I asked her what she was hoping to accomplish by threatening me. She bristled. Elaine was always most fragile when she felt exposed. "I just want fairness," she said. "You got $240,000. And I supported you through everything. You supported me because you're my sister." She crossed her arms. "And sisters don't use each other. You used me. And now you're trying to walk away without compensating me." Compensating. There it was again. I stayed silent, letting her talk herself into deeper waters. People like Elaine reveal the most when they're trying to justify the unjustifiable. She went on for nearly 20 minutes, pacing, explaining how she had sacrificed her time, her energy, her emotional resources. She reminded me, twice, that she had canceled her weekend yoga retreat because I was having a panic attack the night after discovering my husband's affair. Then she said something that felt like a blade. "You owe me for saving your life." I drew in a slow breath. "Saving my life? Elaine, you gave me a place to stay. You talked to me. I am grateful for that. But you aren't entitled to my divorce settlement." Her jaw tightened. "Then I'll take what's mine another way." And she reached for my mail. Not a drawer. Not a document folder. My mail. She lifted a stack of envelopes, one of them containing documentation about the settlement, and tucked them into her purse before I could even process it. "Elaine," I said, my voice low. "Put that back." She didn't. She clicked her purse shut and said, "If you won't give me half, I'll hold on to what I need until you rethink this." In that moment, she wasn't my sister. She was a thief. I stepped between her and the door. "You're taking personal documents. That's illegal." "And what are you going to do?" she challenged. "Call the police on your own family?" I didn't answer. I simply watched her leave, watched her walk down my driveway, holding my mail hostage like leverage. Her betrayal was not surprising, but it was clarifying. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And if she wanted to turn this into a legal matter, then I would proceed legally. With truth. With precision. I didn't reply to her text. Instead, I forwarded it straight to my divorce attorney, a measured, brilliant woman named Cynthia Hawthorne, who handled conflict with the emotional detachment of a chess grandmaster. Within minutes, she called me. "Marianne, what exactly did your sister take?" "My mail," I said. "Some financial documents." "Without your consent?" "Yes." "Good," she said calmly. "Then we have leverage." I was sitting in the mediator's office, the ink barely dry on my divorce settlement. 2 years of negotiations distilled into a single crisp check for $240,000. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't even breathing properly. I just held it in my hands like a fragile organ removed from my own chest. It meant survival, stability, and a future I wasn't sure I deserved yet. But the real shock came when I walked through my front door. My sister, Elaine, was waiting for me. She was perched on the edge of my sofa with her legs crossed tightly, her phone face down beside her. Her coat was draped over the armrest, as if she had already decided she lived there. "Stay strong," she said as soon as I walked in. Her voice was tender, the same softness she had used throughout my divorce. Encouraging messages. Morning check-ins. Late-night calls where she reminded me I was worth more than my cheating husband ever saw. The kind of support that felt heaven-sent. But then she stood, smiled, and said the 8 words that cracked the floor beneath me. "So, when do I receive my half of it?" I remember blinking slowly, thinking I had misheard her. Elaine, my older sister, the one who used to braid my hair before school, who helped me decorate my first apartment, who whispered encouragement into my ear the night I left my husband for good, was now staring expectantly at me, as if my divorce settlement were some sort of family jackpot that she had been patiently waiting to collect. "Your half," I repeated, my voice thin. "Yes," she said gently, as though the matter had already been settled. "After everything I've done. The support. The time. You said you couldn't get through this without me." My heart pounded. I felt the edges of the envelope cutting into my fingers. Elaine stepped closer. "I put in emotional labor, real labor. And I gave you a place to stay when you left him. Think of this as compensation." Compensation. It was such a small word for the earthquake it caused. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Not a syllable. Not even a breath. It was as though she had reached inside me and plucked out the last remaining thread of stability I had. Her smile wavered when I didn't respond. "Don't make this awkward. We're family. Families share. And you wouldn't have made it this far without me." When I still didn't answer, she sighed dramatically, walked back to the sofa, and picked up her phone. "Honestly, I'm surprised you didn't offer it first." In that moment, something inside me hardened. Not anger, not yet, but a quiet, heavy understanding. I had spent the last 2 years grieving the betrayal of my husband. I wasn't prepared to grieve my sister too. I sat across from her, the envelope still in my hands, and felt an entirely new kind of storm forming. One that would require more than strength. It would require clarity, and evidence, and patience. Because if Elaine thought she was entitled to half of my settlement, she had no idea how strong I could truly be. My name is Marion Hallbrook, and I turned 62 just 4 months before the ink dried on my divorce. Most women my age are settling into retirement plans or planning long-awaited trips. I was learning how to breathe again. I spent 34 years married to a man who grew colder with every passing decade. When I finally left him at 61, my friends called me brave. Truthfully, I felt like a woman who had overstayed her welcome in her own life. But I walked out anyway, with nothing but a suitcase and a determination I didn't yet understand. Elaine was the one who convinced me I wasn't too old to start over, that I wasn't foolish or naive or ruined. She told me I was resilient, worthy, capable. "Stay strong," she would say, usually in a text that arrived just when I thought I would crumble. Now I understood that every word had been an investment she believed would pay out. I want to be clear about something. I am not weak. I speak gently, and I've lived a quiet life, but quiet women are often underestimated. What people see as softness is usually strategy. What they see as patience is often power. But that day, standing in my own living room with a settlement check pressed between my fingers, I felt a kind of shock I couldn't disguise. Not at the audacity of my sister's request. People can surprise you in all the wrong ways, but at how meticulously she had played her part. Elaine had always been a bit theatrical. Growing up, she was the kind of girl who turned scraped knees into tragedies and A- report cards into assaults on her character. She believed the world owed her comfort because she believed discomfort was beneath her. And somewhere along the line, she decided that my life, my ups, my downs, my crises, were resources for her to mine. But still, she was my sister. And for most of my life, I excused her flaws as just the way she is. I see now that what I called quirks were really patterns. And what I called love was sometimes camouflage. After she announced her expectation to claim half my settlement, something shifted in me. Not rage. Rage is too loud, too messy. What I felt was quiet, cold clarity. I didn't react. Not outwardly. Instead, I asked her what made her think she deserved it. She gave me a list. A rehearsed list. Times she picked up the phone. Times she let me borrow her guest room. Times she sent me inspirational quotes. It was as if she had cataloged every gesture, tallying up a debt I never agreed to. I let her speak. I let her finish. And when she asked again when she could expect her money, I simply replied, "I'll think about it." This surprised her. She expected resistance. She expected an argument. But she did not expect calm. Calm unsettles manipulative people. It leaves them without footholds. Over the next week, I made a decision, not one of revenge, but of truth. To show Elaine, not through anger or screaming, but through documentation and boundaries, that her entitlement was her own undoing. She had asked me to stay strong. I would, just not in the way she imagined. My family has always been a constellation of contradictions. Loving but competitive, close but quietly resentful. We were raised in a small Ohio town where reputation mattered almost as much as income. My parents instilled generosity in us, but they also rewarded performance. Whoever shined the brightest received the most praise. Elaine shined early and often.